Good day. Welcome to Peterborough Matters. My name is Paul Rellinger, and I'm joined, of course, by Mayor Diane Therrien. I was thinking this morning, Diane, a little bit about the summer ahead and how we're going to be missing a lot of events. And I guess one of them would be Hootenanny, which was just recently canceled, Hootenanny on Hunter by the DBIA. But there's a long, long list. And it really dawned on me that there's such, we so much take these events for granted when we don't have them. And it's really caused me to reflect on all the great things that happen in Peterborough every summer. And yeah, we're going to miss them this year, but next year they'll be back bigger and better than ever, I'm sure.
Absolutely. There's a lot that's been canceled, and it makes sense. We're in pandemic times, not just the Hootenanny, but we had Music Fest and Folk Fest and Canada Day, and, stemming back from when the St. Patrick's Day parade, I think, was the first sort of casualty here. And it's unfortunate because Peterborough is such a fantastic place all the time, but especially in the summer because we have so much going on. We have such a amazing arts and culture and music community. And I know people look forward to that, all year round. And we have folks that, come in for some of these events from Ottawa and, Hamilton and, all over the place. So it is going to be a big loss, especially because people have been, we've been cooped up for a couple of months now. And, people were really looking forward to supporting their favorite artists and musicians. But you're right, next year they'll be back. They'll be bigger and better than ever. And that's what we do as a community. We pull through, we pull together, get through things, and then build back better. So,
well, that's certainly something to look forward to. And speaking of openings and coming back to some sense of normalcy after all of this, the province announced just recently that it's entering stage 2 of its recovery plan. And it's taken a regional approach, which originally Premier Ford said he wasn't in favor of. Somebody obviously got to him and whispered in his ear that this might not be a bad idea. And to his credit, I think he changed his mind. And what that means for Peterborough is one of the health unit catchment areas that is going to be allowed to proceed with stage 2 reopenings of certain businesses, amenities. Just your thoughts on that. Are you a fan of the regional approach as it's being taken by the province?
It's one of those ones where there's certainly pros and cons to it. I mean, regionally, a place like Sudbury is very different than a place like Brampton. But then when you have a place like Durham region where, 1 kilometer here, things are closed, and 1 kilometer north of there, things are open. But I don't envy the position that the Premier's in terms of figuring out how best to reopen. I do think then, in this case, that the regional approach is, the best way at this time and does make sense. I know they are using evidence-based decision-making and tracking the numbers very closely. So it'll be interesting to see how those things unfold. And certainly Peterborough is in sort of a weird sweet spot in that, our proximity to some of those regions that are still closed. But also we've, again, knock on wood, been good with our numbers in terms of being able to keep them low, particularly when you look at our long-term care facilities. We've fared better than a lot of other places in the province and in the country. So, that speaks to the workers at those facilities and the precautions taken, but also to the seriousness with which the community at large has taken this.
And you raise a very good point. And it should be, clarified that we have to continue to do the things we've been doing, because just as easily as we're entering stage 2, next week we could go back to stage 1. And what a setback that would be.
Absolutely. And that's the last thing anybody wants to see. So it is imperative that folks remember to continue to practice that physical distancing. And if you're not feeling well, to stay home, as tempting as it might be to go out and support your favorite business. We need people to continue to practice that, and common courtesy and being a good neighbor and all of those things, because nobody wants to go back to where we were early April. And that's the risk that we run. I think everybody's aware of that, but we do still need to keep sort of hammering that message, to wear a mask if you have one. If you don't, there's more and more places that are providing them for free. And, again, continuing to wash your hands, continuing to, again, stay home if you're not feeling well, or get tested. There's testing more readily available than ever. So there's a lot of those things that are in place to help make sure that we don't have to go back to stage one, but it also takes vigilance on the part of all of us.
And just staying with this topic, stage two, as we indicated, presents opportunity for new openings of different services and business and amenities. But from a municipal point of view, what does that mean for the city? Are there new challenges posed by that? Things you have to be watching and be aware of?
There's new challenges every day with this. So as you know, our emergency control group meets on Wednesday mornings. So we'll be meeting tomorrow morning. This will be, largely the topic of conversation about how we can ensure that, splash pads, those kinds of city facilities that are going to be reopening that's done in a safe manner. How we're going to be able to manage numbers, going to be tricky because folks have been, at home with kids who have been in school for a couple of months, and the weather's getting warmer.
Yeah.
So, those are definitely topics of conversation. And last night at our committee meeting, there was a motion about city staff and the CAO working with businesses to help facilitate those reopenings. So particularly some of those places downtown and patio space, how might we be able to facilitate additional space for restaurants that don't have a lot of, physical space for capacity and the physical distancing piece. So there is a lot of work being done on that front and on all fronts to make sure, again, that health and safety is the top priority for residents and staff, but also we want to reopen. We want to, be able to use the amenities and facilities that the city has to offer, not just on the municipal side, but also on the business side as well.
One of the many impacts of COVID-19, and there are many, that you're aware of, and certainly I'm sure a little bit concerned about, is the effect on Peterborough Transit. And there's, with the possibility, and again, it's just a possibility, but a very strong possibility, that students won't be physically returning to Trent or Fleming come September, at least to start the year. Peterborough Transit relies on those student fares. I'm trying to remember, but it was maybe $1.5 million of the annual revenues are generated by students. That's a chunk of change. How worried are you about keeping Peterborough Transit solvent through all this and through that?
So, I've always been, very adamant, transit is an essential service that we provide. It's, it doesn't make money. It's not a revenue generator. It never has been. That's not its purpose. That said, that kind of shortfall of over, $1 million, closer to $2 million is definitely a concern. I know that staff have been looking at different options for how we might be able to ensure that we're still, and again, for the last couple months, we've been operating transit without collecting fares, so have been operating that at a loss as well, because we know we need to help people move around the city. But we've been trying to protect the health and safety of the passengers as well as the drivers by not exchanging physical fares. So that's definitely something that, we are concerned about. We already, as I know we're going to talk about, have a budget shortfall in general this year. So staff are looking at ways to, how can we maybe change some of the routes to make them more highly used? How do we, continue to provide service for the students that are here, but not maybe on that every 10-minute basis that the Trent Express was running on? So there's a lot of potential, alternatives being looked at right now, but definitely not an easy solution. And the loss of students is a huge hit, not just to transit, but to the community overall, right? Between Trent, Fleming, and Seneca as well, operating their flight school, there's,
right,
over 10,000 students. That's, a huge percentage of our population. So, it's going to be an interesting couple months dealing with that. So I know that I've had conversations with reps from Trent and Fleming about the economic impact of students not being here, because it's not just transit, it's not just them say not being here to frequent some of the the nightclubs and that kind of thing, but if campus dining halls aren't open, there's staff that work at those residences and work in those catering operations that then aren't working. So there's those ripple effects that we need to take into consideration too. So it's definitely a big issue that we're going to have to grapple with.
We're in 2020, which so far hasn't been terribly memorable. But city,
well, it's been memorable, but
for all the wrong reasons, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But city staff, and to that, by extension, city council, are already looking ahead to 2021 when we talk about the budget for next year. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I may be off on this, and I hope not. But the city or council has expressed a desire to keep any tax hike next year to around 3%, and hopefully even lower. Personally, I find that quite amazing based on what we've gone through this year. That I think, nobody wants a tax hike, but I think that's a pretty good target. And but the question I have for you, is it realistic? Can it be reached in light of all the stuff that's gone on this year? We just talked about transit, right?
Yeah, so last night we had our meeting to pass the budget guidelines, basically just to advance it to the public stage. And there'll be public meetings coming up later in June and through July. And then the budget, deliberations in their formal sense happen in November. So the guideline that staff is proposing, and so this hasn't been endorsed by council,
Sure.
Is a 3% all-inclusive tax increase with a 0.5 that's specifically for capital that would be contingent upon stimulus funding from the province and the federal governments, because we do know that there will be some money forthcoming, hopefully, for capital projects, which is often how governments help recover from an economic recession or depression. So that 3% all-inclusive is, I know, still high for a lot of people. Absolutely. It is, I think you're right, in terms of everything we've gone through. And this 3% isn't even to deal with the deficit that has been caused by COVID. Like, this 3% is, the cost of running the city, of, increases in what it, costs to, to pay for utilities, to pay for staff, to, again, run transit, run all of those things. So there's going to be a lot of discussion about it. I've gotten numerous emails already about it. Some folks are saying, okay, a lot of folks are saying that's too high. So it's tricky. I know that municipalities across the province and the country have been, pressuring the provincial and federal governments to step up and help municipalities get through this budget year and moving into 2021, because they have more tools at their disposal to raise revenue, to be able to reallocate funding, whereas municipalities are limited to, mostly to this property tax, increase. So it's something that nobody wants to do. Realistically, though, we need taxes to pay for keep our city running. We also have a lot of aging infrastructure, which we want to get fixed, and we can't fix it for free. So it's a very difficult balancing act between, what people can afford to pay and what we actually need to keep moving the city forward. And if you put off, there's examples of cities that had 0% tax increases for a decade, and then they realize that they need to pay for a whole bunch of things, and then taxes go up by 20, 30%. That's not what we want. No. So staff and council have been, I think, reasonable in their approaches over the last little while, and how we approach a tax increase, because we recognize that folks are, wages are not going up the way that the cost of everything else is going up, and neither is old age security, those kinds of things. So how do we balance that?
You're watching Peterborough Matters, and certainly the tax situation is something else we're going to have to watch over the next the remainder of this year. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to Peterborough Matters. My name is Paul Rellinger, and with me, Mayor Diane Therrien. Diane, another topic which we haven't heard a whole lot about, we haven't heard a whole lot about anything the last few months, is the sale of PDI and the proceeds from that sale. I understand the sale is finally closing, I believe, in August, and now the options for what to do with those proceeds, which are quite substantial, are numbering even more. I think there was two at one time. Now there's like three or four different things that are being looked at. Can you review what those are very briefly and just comment? Maybe I don't know if you can say this, but if you have a preference for any one of those options.
So you're right. The sale is scheduled to close in early August. It's been a long process. I was opposed to the sale, remain opposed to any privatization of public utilities. That said, we are where we are and need to try to make the best of a situation that a lot of us were not in favor of. So it sounds like a significant sum of money, $50 to $55 million. We talked last night about one project in the community that was going to cost, close to that. So we do need to be strategic and smart about how we use this money, how we invest this money. So, there's been several proposals that have come forward, some from community members, some from more formal organizations. So staff had originally recommended back in November, I believe it was, of 2019, kind of two options. One was a bit of a legacy fund. They recommended investing, they proposed, put on the table an option of recommending through a firm that specializes in municipal investments. Since that time, the Community Foundation of Greater Peterborough has brought forward their own proposal about a legacy fund, which I find much more palatable, actually. They have a really good, you can find it on the city website under the city council minutes in the package that we had last night. There was all of those proposals were compiled into their staff report that came forward. And the Community Foundation has a great track record of investing in initiatives that really help the city of Peterborough and the county of Peterborough. So that's something that I think is definitely worth looking into. And one of the recommendations last night was to form an investment advisory committee. So there's going to be several staff members on there, as well as Deputy Mayor Beamer and the chair and vice chair of finance, councillors Pappas and Baldwin, to look at these options. So Kofi, the City of Peterborough Holdings Inc., had also come forward with a proposal to invest some of that money through them into renewable energy. There have also been a couple of community-based proposals from Transition Town around, again, renewable energy, and as well as folks that represent for grandchildren that we're talking about home energy retrofits.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really interesting ideas. I think, council has talked before about, investing the proceeds and spending, what we're getting in interest on that. So, there's also, I've heard different things from the community. Some people are, would like to see us spend that whole sum on, on fixing some roads or on building a new twin pad, that kind of thing. And then you have everything in between. Mm-hmm. So the investment committee that was struck is going to look at what has come forward already from those more formal and informal organizations. They're going to, I think there'll probably be some more ideas that come forward over the next couple of weeks. And they're going to kind of look at all of those and make a recommendation back to council. So that will come forward. I think, in terms of my preference, I do like the idea of a legacy fund through the Community Foundation, because I think also, as much as, there's a lot of people saying, well, take this money and help deal with the budget shortfall from COVID and that kind of thing. Again, if it's $50 million, say, and $7 million goes towards the budget shortfall, that's already a significant part of that money. So it could be gone like that. So we do need to be very smart and careful about it. So we definitely do need to invest a large sum of it. But I think I'm also going to be talking about putting some of it into, say, affordable housing projects. There's a lot of need in the community. So yeah, so it's going to be an interesting conversation when it comes forward.
Is it your sense, you recall back when the sale was proposed and eventually went through, a lot of public scrutiny, like people were all over it. And is it your sense that how those proceeds are spent will see similar scrutiny from the public? Are people watching this, or do you think people are just really at the point where, okay, the sale's gone through, wherever the money goes, it's going to be needed, for whatever?
I think there's a bit of both in the community. So again, this is public money. We sold off a public asset. And so we need to have residents and the owners of this utility have a say in how this money gets spent. So I do believe that there has already been a lot of public engagement around it. I think that will continue going forward, and rightfully so. This was a sale, again, that, a majority of people were not in favor of. And so, we are where we are. We're going to make the best out of the situation, and we want to use this money to help the community in the best possible way. So there's definitely different opinions on how that would move forward. But I do think and we know Peterborough is always a very engaged and active community that has a lot of ideas, and, the best ideas for how to improve and invest in a community come from the community itself.
During the course of the pandemic, which has grabbed most of the headlines, we heard from the Peterborough Public Health Department, from Dr. Rosanna Salvatierra, that our opioid overdose crisis has not gone away. I believe last count I had was 17 fatalities due to opioids since the beginning of the year. And May was a particularly tough month with about 6 or 7. There was, but a high number. Again, other challenges don't go away, right, because of COVID. I wanted to get from you very quickly, if we could, an update on where we are in terms of a possible safe injection site. Are those discussions still going on, or are they all lost in the COVID situation?
Yeah, excellent point. And it is important to remember that the opioid crisis never went away. And we've had more opioid deaths than COVID deaths in Peterborough. So it is definitely a serious issue that has been a little bit overshadowed by the pandemic, but this is sort of its own epidemic that's happening, right? So it's crucial that we continue to work on that front. And I know that the discussions about the safe injection site have still been ongoing. The issue has been, again, finding a space and a willing landlord. And then we have to go through the provincial approvals process. And MPP Smith has been, vocal about wanting to help with that, but we, still haven't been able to move that far on the site piece. And it does speak to, again, when we're talking about the budget, when we're talking about everything going on in the world, the allocation of resources and how we're dealing with mental health and addiction. So, and we know that things have gotten worse in this pandemic because people have been isolated, people haven't been able to see their loved ones or, go do the normal things that they would do. So all of those things have kind of snowballed. And so we need to be looking at this from a lens that it's all interconnected. And just because one crisis happens, the other ones are still ongoing.
An issue which is really international, and I know you've been watching it closely, as many of us have been, are the protests, particularly south of the border, regarding racism and the police treatment of people of different colors, how it's being perceived by many, and rightly so, as being much different and much harsher than it needs to be. I'm just wondering, is there a conversation there that you have with our own police department about this? Have you had any contact with them about what's going on down there? We had a big rally here not too long ago, right here in Peterborough.
Yeah, absolutely. Last week, and our police chief was there, and several members, of the police force, and he took a knee along with protesters. So it's important to remember that, we do have these issues in Canada. Absolutely. there's been a lot of headlines lately about particularly treatment of Indigenous folks by RCMP or provincial or other police forces. I know that Chief Gilbert locally, he comes from Toronto, so he comes from a city that is much more diverse than Peterborough. And, we do have, always areas to improve on. And the issues around mental health, like we mentioned, are intertwined with the de-escalation training that is happening. So while things on the surface might not, they're certainly different than they are in the States, but we do have issues here locally. Peterborough, routinely ranks within the top 10 cities in Canada for hate crimes. So that's definitely something that we talk about at the Police Services Board. I know that the police chief and the deputy and all of us on the police board do take it very seriously. I've had several emails this week and calls from people that are concerned about it and about, the police budget. So those are all conversations that are ongoing. I think those protests have opened up a whole new window of conversation and ways to talk about it, particularly for white folks. So we'll continue to do that for sure.
You've been watching Peterborough Matters. Great show today. Fastest half hour in show business, really. But we covered a lot of stuff. Thank you so much, Diane, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Paul.